slightly different, a bit of a change of gear in the way that we're going to run this session. I'm just going to have a conversation with Anita. I think I told you this. I kind of fought for this slot. I really fought the idea of doing an interview with you, and then, thought we'd invite some people along as well. And the way that we're going to run it is we'll talk for maybe half an hour or so, and then we'll open it out for Q&A, and we've got some questions coming in from the audience, but I would also, at some point, if I can see people, I'm going to go for the sort of more traditional hands-up method question asking as well. So be storing up some questions as we talk. And the way I'd like to structure the conversation, if that's okay, is almost chronologically.
Yeah.
I'd like to track through your career if we can, and as we're doing that, I'd be really interested in sort of gathering themes and reflections that you have on the role of the analyst in all of this. So if we could take that as a basic structure. I would like to begin, though, by just getting a bit of a feel for where you're from. So maybe say a little bit about where you grew up, and also I'm then interested in sort of what attracts you to the analytical path. Why does that become attractive to you? So is that okay as a place to start, and then we'll just track through? Yeah.
So I was born in London. I live just on the edge of Tottenham now. I live actually opposite the building, which is still running, where my dad had his first job. So my dad's family are from the East End and long-term, East Enders, market stalls, docks, all of that. My mum was brought up in care, and so she was kicked out of care at 15, homeless and all of that. I was initially raised by my grandmother. Then my parents were able to look after me, and they moved out of London. And we went to Kent first of all, and then up to Oxfordshire. And then at 19, as I failed my A-levels first time round, retook them, went to poly. And then at 19, I came back into London and went to what was then the Polytechnic of Central London and is now the University of Westminster. And I did a BA in social sciences, and I didn't know what I was interested in particularly. Other than probably did a BA in social sciences, because in BA social sciences, we did 6 social science disciplines. So psychology, sociology, history, politics, economics, and geography. And in the first year, we did all of those as applied to the issue of work and employment. And I think what I really liked was that sense that problems, issues were multifaceted, and interdisciplinarity has always really interested me, but I liked the economics, and you had to specialise. So I specialised in the economics, and I was, like many kids in my background, going to go and be a teacher at the end of that. But at the end of my second year, slightly following my mum's life, I was also homeless, and my tutor knew that I was in trouble, and he said he'd, as an academic, been on secondment into the Department of Health and Social Security, as it then was, and he said into the economics team, he said they're in the Department of Health and Social Security, they have a scheme where you can go and do a summer job. And this was before internships was what, in those days, if you were posh, you went on holiday. And if you weren't posh, then you worked. It's changed a bit now, hasn't it? So he spoke to the chief economist and helped. And I got that job for the summer, weirdly with another girl who was from Tottenham. So I was living at Broadwater Farm. I managed to get a room in a flat on Broadwater Farm at the time, so I was back in Tottenham. And then that chief economist was called Clive Smee, who I think many people may know and was truly inspirational and changed my life. And he said to me while I was there, there's this master's in health economics at the University of York, which I think you might quite like if you're why don't you find out about it? And if you want to apply, I'll give you a reference. And he said, and if you do that and you get onto that, why don't you think about applying to the Government Economic Service? And if you apply to that, I'll give you a reference for that as well. And actually, I think he did more than give them a reference, because I was not remotely equipped to do either of those things. And I think he probably had a word and said, I know that she failed her A-levels and she doesn't, and she can't write for toffee and all of those sorts of things. And she's not polished and she's not, and I mean, the good, are you a good chap interview at the GES was a car crash and all of that. But I think he helped a bit. And so I then, my first job, so I went to York, I did the Masters, it was wonderful. And then my first job was the Department of Health, and it was still the Department of Health and Social Security on the Government Economic Service.
Wow.
Yeah.
Anita, if we weren't sitting at an analytics conference, there's about 7 zillion follow-up questions I've got about your story. But I know I have to keep us on a track that is themed around analysis. So I'm going to leave all of the questions that I have and just keep going with this. I wonder if there's a sort of like theme one bubbling away here, which is, in your case, is the Clive Smee story. It's maybe about mentors, about role models, so I wonder if that's something that we could keep in mind as we run through this. So you enter the Department for Health and Social Security Services. Keep going. How does and you're this very green economist.
I'm this very, very green economist. Yeah. And the first thing I get asked to do, it's 1990, which is the introduction of the internal market. So I start just as the internal market is being introduced. Margaret Thatcher is Prime Minister for a little bit still. And someone called Richard Douglas is at that time then an up-and-coming finance person in the NHS. And the then finance director, who's been brought in from a consultancy, is a woman called Sheila Masters. And they want to measure efficiency. So this is the beginning of all of that quasi-market and new public management. And so I get allocated to this project with Richard Douglas to try to come up with a way of measuring efficiency, and we proposed the cost-weighted activity index. And so the first thing I did was the design of the cost-weighted activity index with Richard Douglas. Richard Douglas obviously went on to be finance director and is now chairing ICS, and I still use the cost-weighted activity index today. So that was quite a nice start in that actually what I did, something happened as a result of that. And I think that was quite addictive to being a government analyst, because I quite like change and I'm very impact driven, yeah? And so my first experience as a junior analyst was that if you were a little bit creative, and I think maybe because I'd come from this weird kind of lots of, so actually what I did for year 2 and 3 of my undergraduate degree was economics and women's studies. I was a radical feminist at the time. They offered a radical feminism in my thing. I mean, there aren't many of us with that combination. And so I was in this environment there where I was like, oh God, being an analyst, bringing analytical disciplines, bringing a lot of, and one of the things I hold still really strongly is the power and value of theory. Applying theory to a real world problem with and being a little bit creative about that, you could make a difference. The work that you're doing, you could see, in relatively short time, being used across the system, and I found that quite addictive.
It's good. Did anyone say to you, like, careful, you might have topped out? Early on, having an impact. Not what always happens.
No. Yeah, Clive Smee was very wise. So
Okay, yeah.
You don't get to do that all the time.
Could be it. Is there a burgeoning theme here, and maybe it relates to your point about the sort of power of theory? Is there a burgeoning theme here about the power of economics as a discipline? I was very struck by this morning the 2 keynote speakers schooled in that tradition. I mean, you schooled in many more traditions as well and backgrounds. Is there a little theme brewing about the power of economics in all of this?
Yeah, I guess, and I thought, because I was at the Department of Health and Social Care for 4 or 5 years, and then I went to the Treasury, because again, someone said, you know, we think you have the potential to get on. If you're going to get on in the government economic service, you should go to Treasury. It's the heart of things. And economics is very dominant in the government analytical world, very dominant actually in public policy making. And we could talk about whether that's good or not. I think it's probably a bit too dominant in some ways. But one of the things that economics does, which turns out, I think, for a lot of public policy making to be quite useful, thinking about policy, is to provide a way of dealing with and thinking about complex systems. Yeah, and taking all of that complexity of public services, of human behaviour, and putting a relatively straightforward frame of reference to that, which you can then use and apply. And then through my career, what then happened, obviously, and exploded, was the availability of data. And, you know, the keynote just is phenomenal, isn't it? It's amazing. And so then you can start to use that, so you can combine then the theory with the empiricism, and that then can be very powerful. The other thing, I guess, is it creates and this is one of the things that I'd observe, particularly for, say, for the Treasury, is both a strength and a weakness. You can bridge between people and ideas by having this common shared paradigm that enables you to operate quite quickly. Now, that is useful in some cases, but also, of course, it has huge limitations, because as Andrew said this morning, you know, if you get that wrong in some way, if you oversimplify human behaviour, that's the risk with economic theory. If you get some of that, if some of your economics is wrong, then that's quite dangerous. The other thing that can happen, and I saw this a lot in the Treasury, is Treasury, which is quite secretive. The word co-creation and co-production of policy was not invented. You know, if you want the antithesis of that, it's Treasury tax policy. And so the Treasury will, in its own bunker, you know, identify, work through a policy problem, come up with a solution. And you see quite often in history, budgets, that the Treasury thought, this budget's going to be amazing. Everyone is going to love this. And sort of the next day, I mean, the Battye tax is a great example of this. You know, it releases this sort of measures onto a world, and the world doesn't go, oh, Treasury, we are so wonderful, we are so grateful for your brilliance. It goes, what planet are you people on? You know, and if you're really, you know, so all coming from the same worldview makes life quite easy while you're there. All coming from the same worldview is quite problematic if you are actually trying to develop policy that might actually need to be implemented by a whole range of people with different perspectives and different views.
Tell me about your time in the Treasury a little bit then. The backstory you gave me in terms of your upbringing and where you were from, and then your schooling. I don't have you. And feminism, I imagine, is a minority sport in the Treasury as well. I don't have you as being part of that club. Did you? What was it like in the Treasury?
Well, so I went first in 1995, when Ken Clarke was Chancellor. And I went there because, again, at that time, chief analysts sort of spoke to each other, and there was a bit of managed moving of people. So I was kind of, you know, essentially DH Clive Smee and the two senior economists had all said, you need to go to the Treasury. And so they said to the Treasury, she needs to come to the Treasury, so the Treasury said, OK. So I went there for a year, and it was the weirdest year ever. And I just went and just thought, I mean, this is like not real.
In what way? Why?
Well, there were sort of, I remember it was before the Treasury had been done up, and everyone was in offices off a circular courtyard, and there were like the marbly floors, and you just hear the click-clacking of shoes around that, but you wouldn't see anybody. And people had put, people would write a minute about something. They put it in the grid, and then someone would come and deliver. And you might be in the next door room. Someone would come and deliver that grid to you, and then you'd read the minute, and then you'd write your reply back, put it in a grid, and then someone would come and collect that, and then they go and deliver it back to the person in the next room. And I was like, this is proper odd. This is properly odd. And then someone that I'd done my master's with, he'd gone to work, he was a doctor, he'd gone to work for SmithKline Beecham, he was in Spain because he was Spanish, and he rang me up and said, SmithKline Beecham are looking for economists, what do you think about that? And he said, the interview is in Pennsylvania and they'll fly you out Virgin business class. I'm like, well, so clearly I'm going to apply for that, because I'd never been to America or on a business class airline. As you can see, our career planning has been kind
exemplary.
of...
I mean, this is good.
Like, not very... and so I got the job, and I did that for 3 years, and I worked here and in the US and globally, and that was really interesting. And then that took me through to 1998, by which Tony Blair, New Labour were in. And there is quite a good documentary, I don't know if it's still available, about the early days of the Brown Treasury. And the civil service and the Brown team it wasn't going brilliantly well. And so the second permanent secretary sort of tracked me down at SmithKline Beecham, rang me up and said, we think you might be more like this new lot. Do you fancy coming back? And I thought, why not? Why not? It sounds quite interesting. And I went back to work on, I went back actually to work on poverty, but at the time, and it's really interesting how ideas come, the New Labour were really scared of the word poverty, and whether that was all too socialist and all of that.
Social exclusion, isn't it?
So I went back to work on income inequality. And to be the income inequality expert within the Welfare to Work programme. And I remember I arrived in September, and again, this is the power of kind of analysis. And so I thought, okay, we need to get a real sense of what the state of, a bit like Andrew's chart, what actually the state of the issues at the moment, what's going on. And Paul Gregg, who is a really brilliant economist, had, and as an example actually of where longitudinal data really had a direct impact on policy, he and colleagues had done a whole load of work on the 1970, I think it was, birth cohort, which had shown that if you were unemployed under the age of 24, not only obviously did you experience the income loss and the welfare loss during that unemployment, but it changed your trajectory. You early prolonged unemployment had an effect on your subsequent trajectory. The scarring effect, as it's called, of unemployment at a young age. And as a result of that, all of that Labour government's New Deal programmes, treated youth unemployment very differently. So intervention and the depth of intervention was to happen much earlier in terms of people's unemployment, and intervention was much deeper in that. And that was a direct example of a birth cohort study analysis, that longitudinal analysis, used brilliantly, directly shaping a policy programme. And Paul Gregg was instrumental in that. One of those amazing analysts who did incredible work on really important policy issues and then really put the effort in. And my other hero in this is Richard Layard, to say, okay, if I know this, what ought to be done about it? And really worked hard to make change happen. Anyway, so he and I organised this conference in the Treasury about poverty with the CASE team, Centre for the Analysis of Social Exclusion at LSE. And we got life cycle kind of sessions. We did this over 2 days. And Ed Balls, who was the Chancellor Special Advisor, and Ed Miliband came to a number of the sessions on the first day, because Paul Gregg said, come to this, I think you'll find it really good. And actually it was amazing, power of the Treasury. So basically as this sort of, what was I at the time, 29-year-old of the Treasury, I was just able to ring up all these leading academics and say, fancy organising a conference where you come and speak. And because it's the Treasury, I mean, they don't need me from Adam, but because it's the Treasury, they went, oh yeah. And Carol Proper and people like that. It was really, really, really brilliant. Anyway, at the end of the first day, the two Eds had a meeting with Gordon Brown and said, you need to hear this stuff. And so someone came and got me and said, Chancellor wants to see you and you need to tell him about the conference. And so I remember sitting in chairs like this in his study, and he said, so tell me about the conference. And I, like, on my feet, I'm like, okay, I've got like 3 minutes to explain this. And I said, well, you know, the most stark thing is that 40% of children under 5 in the UK are living in poverty today. And he said, that can't be true. And I said, well, that is true. And I talked him through it. And the next morning, I arrived to work, and he said, the Chancellor wants to read. And within 3 weeks, he'd like read everything. There wasn't child poverty. My job had been changed, and I was now poverty. And we published a whole load of papers and proceedings. We then worked on a child poverty target and all of that. And it was incredible.
Wow, there's a few dials you shifted or have been involved in shifting as part of the story that we're going through. There's a few other things that I wondered about in what you're describing. Obviously, I don't know it, but you know, from many, many removes, the story of the Brown Treasury is it's quite expansionist in terms of its role in domestic policy, and also the story of New Labour is that it's pretty technocratic as it goes. Yeah. You know, it's seen as pragmatic. Whatever works, we'll just get on and do. All of which I'm imagining expands the role for, you know, the bright analysts to be exerting their power on the shape of policy. So maybe they're themes as well. Can you track us forward? So what happens after Treasury? Where do we go there?
Oh, so then I'm at the Treasury for a decade. And so I get promoted to Senior Civil Service. I'm in the Welfare to Work team. I get to spend the windfall tax levy, which is fun. And then I start having children, and I had 4 in the end. So I'm backwards and forwards. So because I'm backwards and forwards, and the Treasury really like doing reviews. So this era of public policy is also let's do reviews. And if you're in and out with maternity leave, reviews are quite good. So then I got asked to do the Wanless review, which was the review looking at what were the health, if you like, the pressures on the health system going forward and the health spending needs. So I did that. So that was that, and I still, that's sort of 20 years ago, and I still today draw on that experience and that work, and that was really good. And then I did we did the merger of Job Centre Plus and the Benefits Agency and stuff as a review. That was a really weird thing, went very wrong. And then and did lots of classic public spending. And then 27, had enough of 27, 28, had enough of 2007, 2008, had enough being in the Treasury. And the person I had been working for, so I'd worked for a long time for Nick McPherson, who'd been amazing and had been really good. And then after that, I worked for someone called Jonathan Stevens, so that had been really, really good. He went to DCMS, ready for the Olympics. And so I felt like my time at Treasury had come to an end. And I quite like the idea of the Olympics. And so I went to work for DCMS, initially on the Olympics, to design the evaluation of the Olympics, which is a really interesting. How do you do a counterfactual? I mean, in all my time ever since, when I'm thinking about evaluation design and counterfactuals, I go, actually, this can't be as hard as.
How do you do it? Because the money would have gone somewhere, wouldn't it?
Yeah, I don't think, we never really got a really good counterfactual. But it's also a really interesting thing, the Olympics evaluation, actually, where the things that your theory of change tells you it's likely to do, and everyone thinks are really straightforward things it definitely will do, like increase participation in sport. Everyone will be inspired by seeing these amazing people. Ergo, we will, grassroots participation in sports, children's participation in sport will all increase. The reverse happened. The thing that no one expected to happen, that actually the Olympics didn't cause, but were a catalytic moment for, was a profound change in our views of disability and the potential of people with disabilities. Now, the Olympics didn't create that. That's a much bigger, deeper societal change. But if you remember back the experience of the Olympics and seeing prominently people who were disabled achieving and being visible and speaking for themselves and being heroes in our public life, you did then subsequently see that attitudes to disability and the potential of people with disabilities, that was a moment that stuck, yeah? Not that the Olympics created it, because I don't think in all my reading then of subsequent evaluation that those sorts of events can do. But I think when they're really powerfully at their best, they can crystallise and magnify something which was happening anyway. So that was really interesting. I became chief analyst. I became chief scientist because I was on maternity leave and no one else was around, and had an amazing time doing that. Behind the scenes tour at the British Museum is amazing. And then in 2010, I thought, I've had enough of the civil service. I've been in here for a long time. The DCMS was being cut. I was leading restructure. We'd cut once by 20%, and we were cutting again by 25%. And my husband said, well, I'm sure you can stay in the civil service, but is this a moment? What would be your dream job? And I thought, I thought about it. And he said, well, who would be your dream boss, and who might give you a job? And when I'd done that oneness review that I mentioned about, I had spent quite a lot of time then with the director of policy at the King's Fund, which was someone called Jennifer Dixon. And she had gone to be the chief exec of the Nuffield Trust. So I sent her my job description for my dream job. And I said, my husband had worked in sales before, he'd then become a teacher after we'd had kids. And he said, what's the worst that happens? You're not out for it. What's the worst that happens? So I thought, well, that she never speaks to me again. But, I just make sure the email's written nicely. And I said, I think it would be really great if at the Nuffield they had this. And actually, she said, that's quite a good idea. And so for the last 14 years, I've worked for Jennifer Dixon, which is part of my strategy. And in all seriousness, I have found that, working for people who value the things that you value actually is incredibly important. And whilst the content of work really, really matters, the space to work with someone who you really admire and respect, whose sense of what the possibility of a role, the possibility of a work area. You will work with one of my other heroes, which is Peter Spilsbury, who is the same kind of, let's expand what analysis can do. Let's make it really relevant. Let's be really ambitious for this and take a few risks. And I just thrive and love and want to work in that environment.
That's fascinating. And that's kind of a common story, and that's the story you hear in the strategy unit that analysts will tell as well. I think Peter is here, isn't he? We could probably embarrass him somehow. It's partly about having someone with creativity, which I wonder if is a bit of a thing, because I've heard you touch on it a few times, and some sort of vision and sense of expansion, and some air cover, and some communication skill, and all of these sorts of things.
Yeah.
Which again are helping, I'm guessing, in your story, to create the environment for someone with analytical talent to grow and expand and develop, that kind of thing.
Yeah, and the thing I'm good at, so I'm not by any stretch of the world the best technical economist. I'm so not. But I think what I'm quite good at is thinking about what are the problems where economics could make a contribution. And that's why, I've recently joined the council of the ESRC, and one of the things that I think I bring to that is where can great economics, potentially make a difference? And actually kind of question spotting, if you like, topic spotting, and thinking about that is quite important, because what we could do is huge. And then the other thing which I'm quite good at is the so what and the applying, and thinking quite creatively about the policy implications and the policy solutions. And that makes me quite a good bridge between people who are much better at the detail of the analysis than me and people who are policymakers. And I always think I sit in that middle world, and I constantly go back to the absolute master in this of Clive Smee, who taught me also to think that for analysis to thrive, it needs to do two things simultaneously, and both in balance matter. It needs to be the highest quality analysis of real rigor, and if we don't do that, in the end, you might have a moment, but it won't last. But it needs to be relevant, and impactful, and help answer the so what. And we need to push ourselves to do that. People have to make policy today. Climate change is the prime example about that. If we wait 20 years to know everything, as it were, it will be too late. And so good analysis with good theory, and we have more and more, how to make decisions under uncertainty, more and more insights into that. We push ourselves hard, we can make a real contribution to long-term problems.
So I could talk to you all day, but I know there are other people who might have some questions as well. But I do want to just end with the Real Centre, and a theme that you touched on this morning, you just ended on there, which is this sense of analysis being able to take different time frames from, let's say, for example, political cycles. I guess that would be the classic way of thinking about it. And also, I think it was Andrew Dilnott this morning talking about analysis as having a way of showing policymakers reality, or people with power could be shown reality by analysis as well, and can be shown over a different time frame. So I just wonder if you just say a couple of things about that, and then I'm going to take questions from the audience.
Yeah, I mean, we founded the Real Centre really to think about a couple of different things. One is that a lot of what are the most visible problems in our system, 7.6 million people on a waiting list, the presenting problem is not always the real underlying problem. And in a lot of the heat of immediate policy making or service delivery, you're very much pushed to address the presenting problem. And really, to unlock the deep and effective solutions, you need to get to the underlying problem. And so it felt like one of the things that often got crowded out was the scope to think about what are the underlying problems, and to help people to sit back and be able to think about that. What are the underlying problems? And so one of the things that we try to do there is to think about that. To think more long-term, and in particular, I think if you're outside the system, it's very hard to have an impact and an influence on what people are doing today, next week. But actually, if you do this really, really well, you can start to influence and shape agendas to think about the future. And we've put a lot of work over the last 5 years into trying to say to people the workforce really matters, what are some of the issues in the workforce, and helped, I hope, to get people to think about that. We are now thinking a lot about capital investment and the need to make sure that the combination of inputs is really right. And to think and to help people to think about, we try to spend our time focusing on the things that aren't people's day-to-day today, but in 3 years' time will be their day-to-day. They just don't, it's just not hit yet. And to be ready for that. And then the other thing that we did kind of, I guess, really think is that a lot of what is, so all the stuff I presented this morning is known and knowable in one way, shape or form, if you were on top of an enormous amount of academic literature. And good dissemination helps academic literature, but I guess our thesis is that actually a lot of the things that are really interesting for policymakers is about the ability to combine different trends, different issues that are going on, and think about them together and think about where they take us. And actually that requires a block of work that actually it's really hard to do as an academic. It's hard to do as a policymaker. It's back to this metaphor of the bridge. And I try to get the real centre, especially because we're endowed funding, to focus on filling a gap, to doing the things that the academic world can't do, and do the things that it's very hard if you're an analyst in government to get the space to do, and to be a bridge between those worlds, to do something that is a bit added value and complements the work of those two worlds.
That's nice, thank you. So I've left no time at all for questions.
Sorry,
but we could probably
me, I talked too long.
No, it was also me. I would mind you with questions forever. I'm going to do this old school. Can we do this with hands? And we're going to do it with hands and then with shouting. So can I start? Oh, hands and microphones.
Yay!
Lovely assistanting. Here you go.
Yeah.
No, you've already ruined the system. Down here. Yeah, look, there we are.
Hello.
Hi.
Anita. First of all, thank you very much for being so generous with telling us about your background. It's the second time I hear about your career. Very inspiring each time. I had a question around, so you lived through a change of government, and I was wondering if you had any lessons for civil servants or people that work closely with government on that transition and what works, what doesn't.
Yeah.
Do you want me to take them in batches?
Yeah.
Yeah. Can we take another one? You had your hand up. Yes, that's it. There we go. Stephen, is that your hand? Are you? Okay, you should not go to an auction.
This might be a tough question. I didn't expect you to start with that background. I didn't expect you to say I failed my A-levels. And it sounds like you met somebody at the right time and they gave you a lot of help. How likely is it somebody today who failed their A-levels would become an analyst?
Yeah.
It sounds like it sounds to me like you've been really driven probably by early experiences and the impact. So is it easy for someone with the same background to get in, and we'd be missing that diversity of opinion?
Yeah.
Do you want to go at those? Should we go at those two? So
Yeah.
we don't run out of...
So in terms of a new government, so the thing I would say is really, really important, and actually this government hopefully is to step away from the detail of what's in their manifesto, because they're probably less wedded to that than they will admit, and try to think both what overall are they trying to achieve and what's the paradigm that they bring to that, yeah? Because underneath the detail of the measures is a worldview, yeah, about the role of government, the way society operates. And if you're trying to think about developing policy solutions and policy options, you need to get inside that head, so that what's important is, if the thing that they've put in the manifesto won't work, which is quite often the case because oppositions don't have the resources and the manifesto is written to get elected. Yeah. If you can get inside and really think yourself into what are they trying to achieve outcome-wise and what's their frame of reference, then you can say, well, understand that, you wanted to do X. And actually, here's a whole host of reasons why that might be problematic. If you stop there, you're just the people who are against us and blocking us. If you say, but I think, based on this analysis, this evidence, and you could do it this way and achieve the same objective, then you are suddenly game on, yeah? And so I think that's spending some time trying to really think inside their worldview alongside their objectives and then think about how the analysis helps that. The second question is one that worries me a lot because it's really, really difficult. My experience is that in a world before fair, open and transparent recruitment processes and all of that, I got very lucky and then some people used their positional power to really help me and to take a punt on me. I do remember I became a senior civil servant never having written a submission to a minister. And like a submission to the minister is the most basic thing that you do. And Nick McPherson said, you will have a team of people who have written them. And if you like, I'll read the first few and stop any howlers. And people went out of their way and did take a risk and a punt. And the world is better for fair and open and transparent processes because, for the occasions that someone used that to help me, more often, essentially, it was used to exclude people. But how you make sure that people, I would have failed every single fair and open, transparent recruitment process that is run. Yeah, so I couldn't do any of the things that you're supposed to do, and I couldn't answer any of the proper questions. I was so unpolished, and so which just makes me think that actually achieving diversity is really quite hard, and we have to think about it a lot. And a lot of organisations, try things in the name of improving diversity and end up finding out that... So the classic example at the moment is taking all people's backgrounds off selection processes. And what it doesn't enable you to see is, that person may only have, may not write a very good answer here, but actually what they've done before this and where they've come from suggests that there might be something, you can't see all of that as well. So I do think it's something we should continue to worry about a very great deal.
Excellent, thank you. I'm conscious of time. We've got just a minute left. Maybe we can get one more question in, but we'd have to make it a reasonably quick one. Does anyone have a question that they think can be answered in fairly brief terms? There we go.
Yeah.
Thank you. Really enjoyed it. I'm head of HR and recruitment, and I have to ask this question. What is your secret? Why, or what did those people see in you? Why did they put so much trust in you? Basically, what is your secret?
Hang on, so I can see a thing counting down here. You've got 50 seconds to deliver your secret. This is...
Oh, gosh, no. There was a lot of advantage in being different when organisations wanted to be a bit different, yeah? And I think, yeah, so I think that I was very blessed with some people who were very prepared to put a bit of themselves on the line for me. And I think one of the things that I really hope I now do, and I hope everyone here thinks of doing, is being prepared to put a bit of yourself on the line for someone else. You know, there's just, it's really important to be kind and giving, and there was nothing in it for them. There was nothing in it for Clive Smee, nothing in it for Nick McPherson, you know, nothing at all. And that's really humbling.
That's excellent. That's wonderful. A lovely note to end on as well. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you ever so much for agreeing to be interviewed. Thank you for sharing so candidly.
Yeah.
I was listening partly with the audience's ears on and was thinking I was catching loads of great advice and loads of great ways of approaching things. So can we all say thank you to Anita in the traditional way?
Thank you.